Okay, looks like we're live. Just checking my phone. This is like the first time that we've ever done this. This is something totally different. Haven't tried it this way before, but I wanted to see if this was maybe a way to go for the future. But you go ahead and let me know. I know most people don't actually watch lives until they are, already done and over with because most people don't have time to sit here and, just stare at YouTube all the time. So, but I wanted to try something a little bit different just to see how it would work. So, I'm just checking to make sure. And yep, looks like it's going on good. I had to check over there on my phone. Once again, apologize. This is my first time going through this with the live stream. But, anyways, as you can tell from the thumbnail, as you can tell from the article that we got pulled up, and I think this is the first time my face has been on this channel. Hello. But it says Pastor John MacArthur says there is no such thing as mental illness and calls PTSD grief. So I first saw this when I woke up this morning, actually, and was on a tweet, and it was from, I think it was from Julie Roys, and basically saying, making fun of John MacArthur. If you didn't know, Julie Roys does not really care too much for John MacArthur. She's always kind of going after his ministry. As Julie Roys is kind of a mixed bag because she does do some good work, that site, just calling out bad things when they happen. But I do think sometimes she kind of picks and chooses and tries to make things happen when they aren't really there. On occasion, I could be completely wrong. And I don't want to minimize anything. So hopefully it doesn't sound like I am, but let's go ahead and continue on with the article. So yeah, I noticed Twitter was just blown up from this. And I thought it was something, hey, why don't we go ahead and look at this, read this, check this out. I did bring up the video of what this conference where it actually happened at, because I wanted to hear it in context. And personally, I have not heard what he said in context. All I did is really forward it to the portion where he starts giving his kind of spiel on this, and I listened up to about that point, but we'll go ahead and get into it as we read the article. So once again, headline, and this comes from the Christian Post, and it's written by Leonardo Blair, and it reads, in what sorry about that, in what at least one critic has dismissed as the Dunning-Kruger effect. If you don't know what that is, by the way, that's basically where someone is claiming that they are smarter than they actually are. And it's kind of like a confirmation bias of their own part, if I'm saying that right, where almost they kind of become too smart for their own good in a way, and they don't believe that they could ever be wrong despite the contrary opinion of other people. So in John MacArthur's case for this, medical professionals saying basically, hey, look, this is a thing. And John MacArthur saying, no, it's not a thing. I'm not a doctor, but this is not a thing. So let's go ahead and keep on reading. Pastor John MacArthur of Grace Community Church in Sun Valley, California, claims there is no such thing as mental illness. And like I said, when this first came out, I was a little shocked because John MacArthur was somebody that I had looked up to, or have looked up to, for a very, very long time since I first became a Christian, back in my young 20s, 39 now, if anybody cared to know. And this is when I really started becoming alive in the faith and starting learning more and more and more. Before that, I was honestly spiritually dead. I wouldn't even call myself a Christian. And then I came to a true saving faith through reading my Bible. And John MacArthur was one of those teachers that, kind of helped me along that way by all the massive stuff he puts out throughout the internet and all of his recordings. But let's go ahead and go on here. It says, more than 1 in 5 U.S. adults live with mental illness, according to the U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention. Over 1 in 5, sorry, I've got to get my reading right. Over 1 in 5 youth ages 13 to 18, either currently or at some point during their life, have had serious debilitating mental illness. About 1 in 25 U.S. adults also live with a serious mental illness, such as schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or major depression, which honestly, some crazy large numbers. Think about that. 1 in 5 youth at some point in their life had some serious debilitating mental illness. That's a lot of people. Let's go ahead and keep on reading. And it says, sorry, if you see me keep looking over, I got the live chat put up over here in case anybody comes on and asks anything. We'll keep moving on. Once again, pardon all the craziness. This is the first time trying to do the live deal. It'll get better as it goes on. So it says, days before beginning of the Mental Health Awareness Month, however, MacArthur, who also is the president of the Master's College and Seminary, called the mental illness quote, noble lies while speaking during a panel discussion at the Grace Church of the Valley last Thursday. This is a panel discussion. Costi Hinn was there, another notable name that you may know. So let's keep on reading. It says, citing arguments presented by the clinical psychologist Bruce E. Levine in his book, A Profession Without Reason, and the Myth of Mental Illness by the now deceased Hungarian American psychiatrist Thomas, I don't know how to say that name, Zaz, correct me if I'm wrong. So MacArthur urged parents not to believe in, quote, noble lies. He alleges are being supported by the pharmaceutical industry so they can sell medication to the public. See, this is, it's interesting because I kind of have an opinion on this just based upon where I was in my life at one point in time, but we'll keep reading on and I'll talk about that later. So MacArthur's comment about mental illness comes in response to a question about helping parents navigate America's cultural disaster. And by the way, if you didn't know, I haven't read this yet. So I wanted this reaction to kind of be live on here. If you see me stumbling over my words as I'm reading. So he says here, quote, just to lay it out simply, kids are sinful. I have a great grandchild. And this is actually, I remember this in the YouTube clip video. He said this kind of in the beginning. I have a great grandchild. And by the time they are 3 or 4, their sin nature is starting to be manifest. Then you add the sins of the fathers are visited under generations, the 3rd and the 4th generation, MacArthur also said. So I will say one thing, and I know this is kind of a hot topic, but I do believe that the Bible makes it very clear. We see in the Psalm David writing this, that in sin his mother conceived him, that he had sin since before the time he was born, in the fact that he has a sin nature. And I truly do believe that all people are born with that sin nature as a result of the fall from Adam and Eve. So with that kind of bearing in mind, MacArthur saying that you see that kind of manifest in a 3 or 4-year-old, and he says specifically his great grandchildren. And you can kind of see that, when a young child is, maybe you're playing toys with it and you're waving something in front of it, and the child then goes to grab it, but you take it away because it's time to go, and that child kicks, the child screams, the child is angry. I think I heard Paul Washer say this once, you take that child's brain and put it into a 40-year-old man, and there is nothing that child probably wouldn't do to pound you into the dirt to get whatever they want back. Well, that's debatable to some people. I kind of see exactly what he's talking about. It's that inherent sin nature that we have as people. So let's keep moving on. It says, in addition to their sinful nature, the California megachurch pastor explained that the current culture is now targeting children to trap them in sin, which you can't really argue with that. He says the homosexuals, we are coming after your kids. They're not trying to protect them. They're targeting them in schools. They're targeting them throughout the media. Disney and companies like that develop child entertainment are targeting children for what really amounts to moral and spiritual destruction. So this is a war on the children, said MacArthur, who on Monday released his new book, The War on Children, Providing Refuge for Your Children in a Hostile World. Haven't heard of that book yet. MacArthur asserted that the increased diagnosis of children with mental illnesses today is not teaching them personal responsibility, and medicating them for these illnesses only turns them into drug addicts and potentially criminals. And that's, I kind of do see some truth into that statement. I said I was going to share this closer to the end, but I'll go ahead and share it now. So me personally, I know when I was a young child, I was very hyperactive. I, didn't really concentrate on too much. So my mother took me to the doctor. And of course, what did the doctor say, is every other kid in the 1990s probably did when your mother took you to the doctor for this. Oh, he has ADHD. So what was the cure for that? Here is a bunch of expensive medicine to go ahead and shove in your kid's mouth. That medicine made me feel like a complete zombie. That medicine made me feel like a complete robot. Did my grades get better? Absolutely. Did I have any type of personality? No, I did not. It literally stripped me of who I was. I was like a zombie. And thank God my mom took me off that when she started seeing just how effective that I was. I was literally not the same kid anymore. I got along fine. I still passed all my tests and everything. I just honestly loved to play. I was hyperactive, just like most children are. Let's keep on reading. It says, I was reading a book, an interesting book called A Profession Without Reason. It is a book that shows basically this is pretty shocking to some of you that psychiatry and psychology is finally admitting the noble lies that they have been telling for the last 100 years, MacArthur said. And the major noble lie is such a thing as mental illness. Now, this isn't new. You have Thomas Saz, there's that name again, writing a book, who was a psychiatrist, The Myth of Mental Illness. There is no such thing as PTSD. There's no such thing as OCD. There's no such thing as ADHD. Those are noble lies to basically give the excuse at the end of the day to medicate people. And Big Pharma is in charge of a lot of that. But the pastor argued, okay, so let's take a step back and read this again and make sure we got that. He says, and the major noble lie is, because this is the statement that everybody's talking about, the major noble lie is there is no such thing as mental illness. Now, this isn't new. You have that author again writing a book, who was a psychiatrist, on the myth of mental illness. There is no such thing as PTSD. There's no such thing as OCD. And there's no such thing as ADHD, if I can read, explaining my ADHD right now. Those are noble lies, basically to give the excuse to that at the end of the day to medicate people. And Big Pharma is in charge of a lot of that. I see exactly what he's saying, because that's exactly what I was saying as well. Now, to make the claim, and this is the roadblock a lot of people are having, and honestly, it's kind of a roadblock for me, to be honest, is that there is no such thing as mental illness. I don't know how, John can argue that, because it very much is. Now, I'm kind of more in line that there's Big Pharma out there. There's all this stuff where they are literally just giving names to these things in order to go ahead and medicate our kids up, make money, and all this different stuff, when really they're just going to grow out of it. I mean, this is a true thing. You have these doctors shoving all these kids on different medications that will need eventually more medications and then more medications. And next thing you know, when you pull them off, they're already hooked on it. It's just craziness. So the American Psychiatric Association defines PTSD as a psychiatric disorder that may occur in people who have experienced or witnessed a traumatic event. Let me just pause right there. So if you did not know, I am active duty military. I have been deployed to combat zones multiple times, as early as far back as 2005, when the war in Iraq was really getting hot and heated. IEDs were just coming out. It's a pretty traumatic thing. Let me tell you what, as somebody who has actually been hit by an IED, and has experienced that and seen what it's like, it is a very, very traumatic event. Now, at the same time, do I think there are some people that play that card? And this could be controversial, but you know what? I'm a vet who's experienced it, so I feel like I have a little bit of authority to stand on and say this. There are some people who will play that card and say that they have PTSD from something that honestly didn't affect them, usually to get out of something. Not saying that that is always the case. I'm not even saying that that's the norm. I'm just saying I have seen that before. And what we do is, when we propagate these terms, PTSD, because I've seen it so many times in the Army, I've had soldiers come up to me fresh out of basic training, not seen a day in combat. All they've done is what you do in basic training, going to mental health areas and claiming that they have PTSD. It's a mindset that people get themselves in sometimes, because we put this name on it, we put it out there, and nobody wants to say, whoa, you don't actually have it, because we're not trained professionals. And I got to admit, I am not a trained professional in it, but someone who has lived through something traumatic that multiple people would claim PTSD from, I see when some people are probably exaggerating, or maybe they don't even know what it actually is, but we always just want to go ahead and put that PTSD symbol on it. Go ahead, here's a whole bunch of medication, and the doctors and pharma and all this stuff make money off of it. I'm not saying, I know it sounds like I'm painting doctors and pharma in a big broad brush there. And I want to say, number one, doctors do amazing things. Doctors are responsible for saving lives. I do not think they're all out there trying to get rich quick off feeding people a bunch of drugs. Same thing with pharmaceutical companies. Well, this one's a little bit more debatable. Pharmaceutical companies do give life-saving medicine to people. Now, what's going on in the inner workings of that? Why is it so crazy expensive? I have no idea. And are they creating things for illnesses that really are manageable outside of medicine? That's something that is debatable. Let's go ahead and keep reading on. So it says Harvest Bible Chapel founder James MacDonald is among those who have been diagnosed with the mental illness. One of 6 million veterans served in fiscal year 2021. About 10% of men and 19% of women were diagnosed with PTSD, according to the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs. And that's pretty, honestly, I think that's a very, very accurate stat just from my personal experience. About 10% of men there. I can't really speak on the woman part since I'm not a woman. And I was in a job that was primarily made for men. It was a combat arms job. So let's keep reading on. So for MacArthur, however, PTSD is nothing but grief. He says here, and I quote, "If you understand, take PTSD, for example, what that really is grief. You are fighting a war, you lost your buddies, you have certain amount of survival guilt because you made it back, they didn't. How did you deal with that grief? Grief is a real thing, but grief is a part of life. And if you can't navigate grief, you can't navigate life," MacArthur asserted. See, that's tough because I've never personally enjoyed reading people's perspective on combat stuff or that have never actually experienced combat themselves. I don't know what MacArthur's seen in his life when he's gone overseas multiple times, things of that nature. But from a soldier standpoint, I always have a very, very hard time digesting words when somebody's talking about traumatic things that a soldier would experience that they honestly have no idea about. So it's kind of interesting. I'm feeling really, really mixed up about this now. And I guess that was the point of doing this live, is to get just honest feedback. Let's go ahead and keep reading. It says, "But if you clinically define that, you can give them a pill, a series of medications, and they end up in LA homeless on the sidewalk. This is in regard to the children. It is the most deadly thing that have been unleashed on the children," medication, he added. And that goes back to what we were talking about earlier. It really is, I think, something that is dangerous for children to just be over medicated. We're in a society where medication is just being given to children over and over and over again. And like I said, somebody like me who has gone through this, somebody who has been given medication that basically stripped the life away from me, like I said, that turned me into a zombie. And thank God my mom got me off of it in time before it had any permanent or lasting damaging effects. But that's what we see a lot of times happening. And you can go read just any testimonial about a lot of these things. It's that medication causes one issue, which needs more medication, which needs another medication. And it just continues to pile on. Instead of just trying to diagnose the root of the problem, we try to help out with the symptoms. And we do that by giving multiple types of medication. And once again, I want to be 100% clear. Medication is a good thing. Medication helps out, and medication is at times needed, but we want to make sure as a society, we are not dependent on medication. So MacArthur said he's been trying to get the word out through his book, The War on Children, Providing Refuge for Your Children in a Hostile World, but several Christian publishers refused to publish it. Wow. Wonder what's in that book now. I might get it just to see what's in there and why not. But if he's making statements like this, I guess I can understand why some people would say this. So we're trying to make clear to parents that behavior is essentially the result of choices that kids make, he said. And if you parent them properly, they'll make the right choices. If you blame it on something other than their choices, you identify them as having something they can't do anything about but medicate it. You literally are turning your child into not only a potential drug addict, but maybe a potential criminal because they never learn how to navigate life in a socially acceptable way. So once again, this is MacArthur. He has a very, very strong point in what he's saying. But at the same time, I really don't think he said it in 100% the right way that you would kind of navigate something as sensitive as this. I do think people are over medicating children. I do think that we are just slapping labels on things that aren't really there and then pointing blame into those things. Because what we never want to do, especially as Christians, we don't want to go blaming other things for our problems. We'll blame it on, this is just generalizing here. Don't take anything personal, but, blaming it on PTSD or blaming it on whatever mental illness it is, instead of blaming it on the sin that it is. Oh, my mental illness caused me to do this, not my sin nature, et cetera, and so on. Once again, that is a very, very giant bag, and a bag that I am not going to unpack during this short streaming session because we are about to just wrap up here soon. But I want I want to go ahead and let me go to this tab over here and just kind of show you what was said. Hopefully this comes up and plays well. And here we go. Let's just go ahead and play it because I want to get this in context to hear what he actually said in his words. And FYI, if you don't know, this is John MacArthur over here. This is Costi Hinn over here. Costi Hinn, a very solid pastor, young, up and coming. I think it was Benny Hinn's nephew, if you did not know that. So he has a very, very awesome testimony. But John MacArthur, he is starting to come up in his years. And when he's talking here, it will go a little bit slow. He is definitely, his age is starting to show, which is something we continue to pray for on him. So let's go ahead and just listen and hear what he's got to say.
Part of it the other day, I was reading a book, interesting book called A Profession Without Reason. It's a book that shows basically, this is pretty shocking to some of you, that psychiatry and psychology is finally admitting the noble lies that they've been telling for the last 100 years. And the major noble lie is there is such a thing as mental illness. Now, this isn't new. You have Thomas Saz back in the 1950s writing a book, who was a psychiatrist, on the myth of mental illness. There's no such thing as PTSD. There's no such thing as OCD. There's no such thing as ADHD. Those are noble lies to basically give the excuse to, in the end of the day, to medicate people. And Big Pharma is in charge of a lot of that. If you understand, take PTSD, for example. What that really is grief. You are fighting a war, you lost your buddies, you have a certain amount of survival guilt because you made it back, they didn't. How do you deal with the grief? Grief is a real thing. But grief is part of life. And if you can't navigate grief, you can't live life. But if you clinically define that, you can give them a pill, a series of medications, and they end up in LA homeless on the sidewalk. This is in regard to children, it's the most deadly thing that's been unleashed on children, medication. We're trying to make clear to parents that behavior is essentially the result of choices that kids make. And if you parent them properly, they'll make right choices. But if you blame it on something other than their choices, and you identify them as having something they can't do anything about, but medicate it, you literally are turning your child into a potential, well, not only a potential drug addict, but maybe a potential criminal, because they never learn how to navigate life in a socially acceptable way. So the book deals with the ways in which children are being assaulted, and they're formidable because they're done by media, and they're in the hand of every kid through the cell phone. So the church has got to step up. We started a campaign called Grace for the Children. If you want to strengthen the church, and I know it's true here, if you want to strengthen the church, minister to the children.
You know, and that's a very true statement. When you are built on a solid biblical foundation, take for me example. I keep using me because, you know, this is something I don't want to speak on someone else's behalf on, because it is a very sensitive subject. So I'll talk about it on my behalf, having to go through a lot of traumatic events that most people would categorize, in these categories. As a child, if my parents did not raise me up on a foundation of God like they did, they raised me up on a foundation of God. They raised me in the Bible. They taught me about Christ from a young age. And while I didn't come to an actual saving faith till later on in life, like I said, around mid-20s, I honestly, I don't know what would happen to me in these situations, seeing what I saw when I was deployed or going through different events, things of that nature. It is enough to break people down. And it is a form of grief. One of the hard, and it's really watching this, it's really mixed. But going back to the point that I was making is that children, honestly, churches, we need to invest in those children. We need to build them up on those biblical foundations. And really, this goes back to the family because, how much learning is actually done in church. You do get some good chunks, you do get some good fuel put in the tank, but the real learning is going to come from the home. And the church can create that culture for the family to be able to bring them up in that home through a variety of different ways. So he does have overall, he does have a very, very strong point, and we'll go ahead and go back over to the article. Uh, so he does have a very, very strong point, I think, in the broader scheme of all of this. But it's the words that were used and how they were used that I think a lot of people are getting upset about, which is creating, honestly, a lot of clickbait material for things such as Twitter. I mean, let's just go over there right now, and I'll show you where we're at. I mean, this is all over. You just type in John MacArthur and it's kind of all over the place. I'm not sure if it was on that trending side or what's happening that they have over there, but you got people reporting on it all over the place. And they're just, a lot of it is MacArthur haters. John MacArthur does have a lot of haters out there. So a lot of it is pointing back to other things that he's said before. But you see it's all over Twitter. And what they're doing is they're taking the one statement out there. And I think they are taking it somewhat out of context. At the same time, MacArthur worded this very, very, very poorly, in my overall opinion, because there are mental illnesses out there. Now, what's the root cause of that? It does go back to the fall. It goes back to Adam and Eve. And it goes back to, honestly, good, solid parenting. When you bring up your child in the way that they should go, in the good way that they should go, bringing them up on the foundation of the Lord, I truly believe you are setting that mental capacity for a child to be to be able to handle things such as grief and other things that come at you in life. I know if I didn't have an understanding of the sovereignty of God, there are things in my life that would have broken me apart, and who knows where my life would be right now. So overall, I'm going to go ahead and end this out. Basically, like I was saying, it's kind of a mixed bag. It's kind of a mixed bag because part of it, the overall arching statement, I think, of what John MacArthur is saying here is true when it comes to the over medicating, when it comes to the misdiagnosis of things. But then at the same time, I think he is dead wrong in saying that there is no such thing as mental illness, the way that he said it. One, because if you know anything about John MacArthur, he's clickbait material. He gets up on stage, he says something, and people go crazy over it. Most of the time, it's, just taken very, very far out of context. This one, it's taken a little out of context, but there is some context there that is concerning. And, another thing about John MacArthur, because I love the guy, like I said, he has done so much for me in my life throughout his ministry that he obviously has no idea about. And God has used him in many ways to help me out. But it might be getting to that point where he is starting to get a little too old for what he is doing, and just the way that he speaks and the way that he talks, because he's been doing this for so long. But best thing we can do is honestly just pray for him. And number two, make sure we are always reading into context on things. We don't want to take things out of context. Do our homework. Don't just, read the clickbait material that's out there, but instead dig deep, go in, look at the video. I mean, there's a reason why they did not take this video down, and probably so you can watch the entire thing in context. So I do highly encourage you, go over there, watch this entire thing in its context. And hopefully we can see, and I believe it's coming from, Grace Church of the Valley right there. If you type that in, you want to watch the whole thing for yourself. But anyways, that's all we're going to be talking about. We're on for a lot longer than we normally do, and that is because obviously I am going live and I'm not editing things out like crazy. So we'll go ahead and get off here. But thank you so much for listening. And let me know, do you want me to keep going live on certain things? Do you want me to just stop it and go back to the way it was? Anyways, highly encourage you to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you very much. And we'll see you on the next one. Ending stream.